Welcome back to part 2 of my climb back to Challenger. As much as I'd love to kick off this guide by saying I've been smurfing it every game since last week, that wouldn't be the truth. I climbed really fast from 50 LP to Grandmasters, but then I've started to stagnate again. If I'm being honest, every game has felt kind of unplayable, which I'm sure is like what most of you feel all the time. Like my jungler is giving double buffs at level 1 and then dying again at Scuttle Crab type of unplayable that every mid laner is familiar with. It's gotten so bad that something you should know about me is that I don't type, ever. I'm a very understanding person of mistakes and bad games, but some of these players are making me lose my mind lately. As good as Malzahar is in the current meta, filled with a bunch of bruisers, the consistency at which this is happening to me is making me seriously consider dropping the champion. There was this one game in particular that literally made me quit ADC as my second role. I understand not getting this Vayne kill. I messed up a bit by how I went for it. I wasn't really upset by this part at all, but the fact that I'm going to die to the follow-up play really broke me on this role. I actually yelled IRL at how horribly this Leona trolled me. So that game definitely convinced me to queue jungle as my secondary role, at least for a little while, to cool my head off from bad supports. So it goes without saying that yes, I'm tilted out of my mind. After climbing rapidly to Grandmasters, winning became inconsistent. I kept thinking to myself, wait, if I don't climb, am I literally out of a job? You know, other thoughts like how trash I am that I can't climb out of this garbage. And that's exactly when it hit me. I can't believe I've somehow forgotten this over the years, but if I'm Grandmaster's Elo, that just means I'm in low Elo, but the one where players have decent mechanics. This may seem overly negative considering it's the Elo I'm playing in, so I'm calling myself awful, but this graph is how I personally like to classify every Elo range. If you prefer, you can easily look at things in this positive kind of way, it's the same thing, but I feel like my personal point will be made better if you look at it through a more negative lens. Point being that once I realize I'm in low Elo and I adapted to 3 basic things, the game has become infinitely easier for me. During the laning phase, I'm getting consistently ahead way more often than I was before, and generally I'm very strong in the later stages of the game and I'm able to hard carry fights way more consistently. And as a quick reminder, if you'd like to follow the journey more closely, then check us out on SkillCapped. I'm adding some live commentaries and VOD reviews of my own games to try and teach you guys the lessons I'm learning on my climb, which people seem to be enjoying. Anyway, let's talk about what those 3 things were and why they're so important. One of the main things that I was struggling with before is something we don't really discuss a lot, which is fake laning skill. Whichever side of this that you're on, I guarantee that it's important to understand, otherwise you're going to be throwing a lot more games than you should be, as I was. So what I consider to be fake skill is when you're against players who are playing aggressively the entire laning phase. They're like completely in your face, have total control of the lane, and seem to be the dominant player in the matchup. The reason I would call this fake skill is because it's not hard to look like the better player when you do this. In fact, I'm pretty confident I could pull this off against even great players like Chovy or Showmaker if I really wanted to. If you're just going full aggression the whole laning phase, it doesn't mean that you're outskilling your opponent. The defensive player just shouldn't be interacting with you because you're in a perpetual state of coin flip. I mean, they can interact with you if they also want to coin flip, but you kind of get the point. Not knowing where the enemy jungler is and constantly going for harass and trades is something I experience from enemy laners all the time in this Elo range. And no, let me just say this with 100% certainty, they were not tracking my junglers so that they could play aggressively. There is no world in which that would be true. Okay, so what was my problem? Well, the punish to bad laning like that is, again, usually the jungler. If I'm in high elo, I tend to expect competency from my junglers, and so I would tilt when they wouldn't come mid. To me, it became very frustrating knowing I was losing to someone whom I thought was playing bad League of Legends. If you're tilted, you end up making mistakes, you waste summoner spells, cooldowns, and you lose lane pressure, and that just makes it even less likely that your jungler ever comes. For me, and perhaps some of you may feel the same way, sometimes it's just a mentality thing. Once I started thinking about everyone in the game as low elo randoms, I kind of just stopped caring as much. For my opponents, I realized that their pressure is pretty meaningless. They don't actually know how to convert off their aggression into better recalls or how to manage waves to actually deny me farm. Their best guess as to how to play the game is usually to just try to trade with me or go for random roams. That seems to be about the extent of their skill. If I just play safe, they literally have no idea what to do and I tend to get a free laning phase. As for my junglers, it's almost a self-fulfilling kind of thing. If they see that I'm always full health and have every cooldown, they're just much more likely to come mid. That way the players who are constantly in my face, melee ranging a Malzahar for some reason, actually end up getting punished. Or the Diana players who stand incredibly far up the lane against the Fiddlesticks while they have zero vision, end up getting ulted for their insolence. Moving on to the second big change that really helped me once I realized I was just in low elo, which is to stop respecting my opponents at all. Maybe you already got that vibe that I have zero respect for these players from the previous section, but the more and more I see random roams like these work on my teammates that I ping over and over, the more that I realize that I need to stop giving my opponents more credit than they deserve. Let's take a look at the following situation and why I always advocate for different macro calls based on what elo you're in. As we just witnessed, Akali roamed top against me, which gave me a free push in the mid with a bit of priority to do what I please with. So, let's start with low elo. In this situation, I wouldn't roam and I would just base. I have no boots and I'm sitting on a ton of gold, which means my effective damage is both weaker and it would take a while to pull off due to how slow I am. The issue is that I'm gonna for sure miss a wave if I commit to the roam, then recall, then walk back to lane. It is my personal belief that anything with any semblance of risk isn't worth it in lower elos, since there's usually no need. Your opponents do not farm, build, or play well, therefore you just need a consistent, reliable source of farm to carry, so giving up a wave for an RNG roam isn't worth it. And if I was actually in Challenger, which is how I was approaching things before this video, I probably wouldn't commit to this roam either, as it's unlikely to work anyways. I have to give some credit to Challenger players. Someone on the map would be very likely to say, hey, care for Mal's cross map at the moment. And then the enemy bot plays safe for like 5 seconds and my roam would be completely wasted and I'm missing that wave I talked about. But I eventually realized I'm in the middle of both of those elos. In Diamond to Grandmaster, I do think going for this roam is a bit better for a combination of two reasons. One, I can't literally 1v5 as I'm able to in the lower brackets. As I said, players in this elo range have better mechanics, which means that there is value in helping my teammates get ahead as well to help me carry. And it's paired with the fact that the players I'm up against, as I said, are generally macro clueless, and will likely die to even very obvious cross-map plays, especially since my own teammates are decent enough to appropriately follow up. That was a great engage by Rel, netting us 2 free kills, and this is definitely a roam I wouldn't have gone for before because I had the wrong mentality that I was somehow playing at a higher elo than I actually am. And I just keep getting confirmation that this mindset isn't wrong whatsoever. Here's another example where my Jhin was being heavily pressured under the tower by the Aphelios. I was afraid he might die, so I show myself on the mount and come out of the jungle to try and peel. I was a bit upset because I wasted a lot of time here, I hadn't gained anything, and the enemy jungler just got a free herald. But the enemy Aphelios is still playing aggressively against a bard, and now we've just gotten a free kill. As you can see, everyone just feels really clueless. They have decent mechanics, but I realized I should look to actively exploit how blind they all are to try and climb faster than I was before. One of the final things I'm incorporating from realizing that I'm actually playing in low elo is just how much time I've spent on bad rotations. This is something I completely advise against in almost every video I'm a part of, but I for some reason defaulted to it as I climb more and more. Again, I had a bad challenger mindset. You see, better players are better at closing out games right, which means that every skirmish matters a bit more since a single lost fight for your team could mean the end of the game in Challenger. Now, I don't know if that's the correct mindset in Challenger anymore, that's what I used to believe, so I adhere to it as I climb through Grandmaster. But again, I'm in Grandmasters, which is what I consider to be low elo, which means I'm just in throw city kind of games. It's honestly which team just throws more every single time, which means that self-consistency matters much more than team consistency, if that makes sense. So situations like these are something that was plaguing my gameplay quite a lot. I'd noticed that a fight was potentially brewing on the other side of the map, so I would commit to a pretty inefficient rotation to make sure I was there for most of these skirmishes. This is quite bad, as I have zero idea what's going to happen when I come up here. I'm not a fortune teller, obviously. Whereas in bot lane, there was a wave coming in that I would have been guaranteed to acquire. I could pressure the Kindred down there with my lead as well, and potentially take the tower as a reward. Instead, I'm the one doing the thing I always advocate for you guys not to do. I'm the coin flipping, A-ramming Andy, and once I realized that, it was a pretty easy immediate fix since I already knew what the correct answer was. I was just doing the opposite thing for the wrong reasons. And thus, I've already adapted back to a more selfish, less team-reliant attitude towards solo queue. For example, here we score a kill on the enemy Jace who's overextending like an idiot. I've used my ultimate as a Malzahar, and before Rylai's without ultimate, Malzahar is pretty useless. So I think, okay, the fight is over, I'm gonna go farm bottom. As I move down there, I notice a teamfight brewing as my teammates think that for some reason we should keep going. Normally, I would have teleported here. As I said, I used to think that every skirmish matters, but now I'm like, okay, if my idiot teammates want to int, be my guest. I'm not going to waste my teleport and more importantly miss a ton of farm for absolutely no reason. As long as I'm gaining a significant amount of farm now, I just care a lot less about what my teammates are up to or maybe how they're feeding. And this mentality shift is something I would highly recommend to anyone below Challenger, which I assume is literally everyone watching this video. Alright guys, I think I want to wrap things up here. I know I may have been a bit toxic or negative to supposedly really good players, and they are. Like, relatively speaking, Grandmaster players are really good. But seeing them as clueless, low elo players is helping me climb faster and helps me get certain points across better to you guys, so I personally find the negativity worth it. And remember, check us out on our site if you want to learn more in our special Road to Challenger course. Thanks for watching.